The hall shimmered under a canopy of warm golden lights, each crystal reflection dancing across polished floors like a carefully staged dream. Soft music floated through the air, gentle and elegant, wrapping around conversations and laughter as if nothing in the world could be out of place tonight. Everything was perfect, flawlessly arranged flowers, pristine white linens, smiling faces dressed in their finest. It was the kind of setting that promised happiness, the kind people remembered for years. And yet, standing near the back of the room, I felt completely invisible. I adjusted the sleeve of my dress for the third time in less than a minute, smoothing fabric that didn't need fixing, just to give my hands something to do. I had chosen something simple, nothing that would draw attention, nothing that would invite questions. I didn't belong in the spotlight here. I knew that much. My eyes drifted to the front, where my sister stood surrounded by bridesmaids, her laughter soft but radiant. She looked like she had stepped out of a story, confident, glowing, effortlessly loved. People gravitated toward her, drawn by her warmth, her ease, her ability to make everything feel right. She had always been like that. Even as children, she had known how to fit into the mold our family valued so much. She followed expectations without resistance, smiled at the right times, made the right choices. She made things easy for them, for everyone. I had never been that person. I exhaled slowly, my chest tightening as I took in the scene. For a moment, I considered leaving. I had already shown up. That counted for something, didn't it? I could slip out quietly before anyone noticed, before anything went wrong. Because something always went wrong when I was around. Still, I stayed. Because despite everything, she was my sister, and no matter how complicated things had become, I couldn't miss this. Not this moment. I took a small step forward, then another, trying to blend into the edges of the crowd. Conversations buzzed around me, but none of them included me. A few people glanced in my direction, their expressions flickering with recognition before quickly shifting away. Whispers brushed the air like faint echoes, subtle, but impossible to ignore. I had expected that. I had expected the looks, the quiet judgment, the curiosity. I had learned to live with it long ago. What I hadn't prepared for was him. Look who decided to show up. The voice hit me like a sudden drop in temperature. I froze. Slowly I turned around, already knowing who I would see. My father stood a few steps away, his posture straight, his suit immaculate, his presence commanding in a way that made people instinctively move aside. He didn't smile, not really. The curve of his lips held no warmth, only something sharp and measured. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped closer. "I wasn't sure you had the nerve," he said, his tone casual but cutting, as if we were discussing something trivial instead of something that had been years in the making. I swallowed, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "I came for her." His eyes flicked briefly toward the front of the hall before returning to me. "Of course you did," he replied, a quiet scoff following. "Always pretending you care after everything you've done." The words settled heavily between us. I felt the familiar sting. The old ache that had never fully disappeared, no matter how much distance I had put between myself and this place. I had spent years building walls strong enough to keep his voice from reaching me. And yet, here it was again, slipping through the cracks. "Let's not do this today," I said quietly, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "It's her wedding." "Oh, I think this is the perfect time," he replied, his volume rising just enough to draw attention. "Don't you?" I noticed it then, the way conversations nearby started to fade, the way people subtly turned, pretending not to listen while listening to everything. My chest tightened. "Everyone's here," he continued, glancing around as if addressing more than just me. "Family, friends, people who actually understand what it means to stand by each other." I took a slow breath. "Please." But he wasn't interested in stopping. "I think they deserve to know," he said, his voice clear now, carrying further than it should have. "What kind of daughter I have." A few heads turned fully this time. The air shifted, anticipation creeping in. I felt heat rise to my face, but I refused to look away. "A disgrace," he said, each word deliberate, sharp enough to cut through the music. "That's what you are." The room seemed to shrink. "You walked away from your family," he went on. "You embarrassed us. You chose your own selfish ambitions over loyalty, over responsibility. And now you walk back in here like none of it happened. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel it, the weight of every gaze, every unspoken judgment pressing down on me. My fingers curled slightly at my sides, nails digging into my palms just enough to keep me grounded. For a moment, words failed me. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had said it all before, in arguments that went nowhere, in conversations that always ended the same way. Still, I forced myself to speak. I didn't come back for you. I said, my voice quieter than his but steady in a way that surprised even me. I came for her. He let out a short, humorless laugh. That doesn't change anything. No, I replied. It doesn't. Another pause stretched between us, thick with everything left unsaid. Then he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to feel personal again, even though everyone could still hear. You don't belong here, he said. The words landed harder than I expected. For a split second, doubt flickered through me, fast and dangerous. Maybe he was right. Maybe this place had never been mine. Maybe I had spent too long trying to exist somewhere I was never truly accepted. I could leave. I could turn around, walk out those doors, and never look back. It would be easier. But as I stood there, something inside me resisted. Not loudly, not boldly, just enough to keep my feet planted where they were. I do, I said quietly. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. But I didn't repeat myself. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to convince him. I was trying to remind myself. The ceremony began with a soft swell of music, delicate and precise, as if every note had been chosen to reflect perfection. Guests shifted in their seats, conversations faded into silence, and all eyes turned toward the aisle. I sat among them, still and composed on the outside, but inside, my thoughts refused to quiet. My father's voice lingered in my mind, echoing louder than the vows that were about to be spoken. A disgrace. The word didn't feel new. It wasn't shocking or unfamiliar. It had lived in me for years, buried deep but never gone. Hearing it again didn't break something inside me. It reminded me of all the cracks that had never fully healed. I focused on the aisle as the doors opened, and my sister appeared, her presence drawing a collective breath from the room. She was breathtaking, not just because of the dress or the way the light caught her veil, but because she looked certain. Certain of her place, her choices, her future. I wondered what that felt like. As she walked forward, step by step, I tried to anchor myself in the moment. This was her day. Not mine, not his. I repeated that silently, like a shield against everything threatening to pull me away. The officiant began speaking, his voice calm and practiced, weaving words about love and commitment. People listened, smiling, nodding, some already emotional. But I struggled to absorb any of it. Every sentence seemed distant, like it was happening behind glass. Instead, memories surfaced. I remembered the day I told my family I didn't want to take over the business. The disappointment had been immediate, sharp, and suffocating. My father hadn't even tried to understand. To him, it wasn't a discussion, it was a betrayal. "You're throwing everything away," he had said back then, his voice filled with disbelief. "Everything we built. Everything we planned for you. It's not what I want," I had replied, my hands shaking but my voice determined. "What you want doesn't matter," he snapped. "Family comes first." But for me, it had never felt that simple. Choosing my own path hadn't been easy. It hadn't been glamorous or freeing in the beginning. It had been terrifying. I had struggled, failed, started over more times than I could count. There were nights I questioned everything, moments I almost gave up. But even then, I had felt something I never did at home. Choice. The memory shifted, pulling me into another moment. The day I refused the marriage he had arranged. The look in his eyes hadn't just been anger, it had been something colder. "Final, you're done," he had said. And just like that, I was. Cut off, cast out, reduced to a lesson of what not to become. The applause in the present snapped me back. My sister and her partner were exchanging vows now, their voices steady, filled with promises that sounded both fragile and unbreakable at the same time. I watched her closely. There was no hesitation in her. No fear, just certainty and love, reflected in every word she spoke. It made something twist inside me, Not jealousy, not regret, but a quiet ache for what I had lost. Or maybe what I had never truly had. For a brief moment, her eyes lifted from the person standing across from her and found me in the crowd. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't fleeting. She held my gaze. And in that single moment, something shifted. There was no judgment in her expression. No distance. Just something warm, something steady. Understanding. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to do with it, so I simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. But it felt significant in a way I couldn't fully explain. Then the moment passed, and she turned back to continue her vows. The ceremony moved forward, building toward its conclusion. Rings were exchanged, promises sealed, and when they were finally pronounced married, the room erupted into applause. People stood, smiling, celebrating, completely absorbed in the joy of it all. I stood too, clapping along, though my hands felt slightly numb. This was how it was supposed to be: simple, beautiful, whole. And yet, even surrounded by all of it, I felt like I was standing just outside the picture. The transition to the reception was seamless. Music grew louder, laughter returned, and the formal atmosphere softened into something more relaxed. Guests mingled, drinks were poured, and the celebration shifted into full motion. I stayed on the edges. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was instinct. I moved through the space carefully, avoiding clusters of conversation, choosing corners over centerpieces. It was easier this way, less chance of confrontation, less chance of becoming the topic of discussion again. A few people approached me, offering polite greetings, their smiles slightly uncertain. Some asked how I had been, their tone carrying curiosity beneath the surface. Others simply nodded and moved on, as if unsure how to engage with someone who had become more story than person. I didn't blame them. In many ways, I had become exactly that: a story told in fragments. A version shaped by someone else's perspective. I picked up a glass of water, more for something to hold than anything else, and found a seat at a table near the back. From there, I could observe without being too visible. My father moved through the crowd with ease, greeting guests, shaking hands, playing his role perfectly. No one would have guessed what had happened earlier, not from the way he carried himself now. He was composed, controlled, every inch the man people respected. It almost made me question if it had really happened. But I knew better, because I could still feel it. The tension lingered beneath the surface, quiet but present, like a storm waiting for the right moment to return. When the time for speeches approached, a subtle shift moved through the room again. People began to settle, chairs scraping softly against the floor as attention turned toward the front. I felt it immediately, a sense of unease settling in my chest. I knew he would speak. Of course he would. He thrived in moments like this, where he could shape the narrative, control the tone, remind everyone of the version of reality he believed in. I considered leaving. The thought came quickly this time, more urgent than before. I could slip out now, before it started, before he had the chance to say anything else. No one would stop me. It would be easy. I even pushed my chair back slightly, testing the idea. But something held me there. Maybe it was the memory of my sister's glance during the ceremony. Maybe it was the quiet refusal building inside me, stronger than it had been before. Or maybe I was just tired. Tired of leaving, tired of avoiding, tired of letting his words dictate my presence. So I stayed. My father stepped forward, taking the microphone with a confidence that filled the room instantly. The chatter faded, attention locking onto him as expected. He smiled, charming and practiced. He spoke about family first, about traditions passed down, about values that shaped who we become. His words were smooth, deliberate, the kind people nodded along to without question. I watched the room respond to him, drawn in by his certainty. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, his tone shifted. "Some of us," he said, pausing just long enough to create anticipation, "understand what it truly means to stand by our family, to support them, to honor the bonds that hold us together." A few murmurs of agreement followed. I felt it coming before it happened. "To not turn our backs when things become difficult," he added. My grip tightened around the glass in my hand. A pause. "But not everyone here shares those values." There it was. He didn't say my name, he didn't need to. The message settled into the room, subtle but unmistakable. A few uncomfortable laughs broke the silence, people unsure how to react, caught between politeness and unease. I stared down at the table, my reflection faintly visible in the polished surface. For a moment, the urge to leave surged again, stronger this time. I could still go. I could stand up, walk out, and leave all of this behind once more. My chair shifted slightly as I moved, preparing to stand. But then I stopped. Because something inside me had changed. The part of me that once ran from moments like this hesitated. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I didn't walk away. I pushed my chair back, just enough for the legs to scrape softly against the floor, the sound barely noticeable beneath the low hum of conversation returning after my father's speech. My heart was beating faster now, not from fear exactly, but from something more complicated, something that felt like the edge of a decision I had avoided for years. I rose to my feet. No one stopped me. No one called my name. It would have been easy to slip away, just another quiet exit that no one would question out loud, but everyone would understand. That had always been my role, leave before things got worse, before I became the center of attention, before his words had the chance to sink in any deeper. I took a step, then another. The distance between me and the doors didn't seem far, but it felt heavy, like every movement carried the weight of something unfinished. My father's words still echoed in the back of my mind, blending with years of similar moments, each one reinforcing the same message: you don't belong. I reached the edge of the crowd, close enough now that I could feel the cool air near the entrance, close enough to disappear. Wet. The voice cut through everything, clear, firm, unshaken. I froze mid-step. For a second, I wasn't sure I had heard it right. It didn't sound like him. It didn't sound like anyone who had spoken so far. Slowly, I turned around. My sister was standing. The room shifted almost instantly. Conversations faltered again, attention pulling toward her the way it had during the ceremony, but this time there was something different in the air, something uncertain, something that made people hold their breath without knowing why. She stepped forward, her movements calm but deliberate, her expression composed in a way I hadn't seen before. Not the soft, easy smile she had worn earlier, not the glowing bride everyone admired. This was something else, something stronger. My father looked at her, confusion flickering across his face. "What are you, Dad?" she said gently, but there was a firmness beneath it that stopped him mid-sentence. "I think it's my turn." There was no hesitation as she reached for the microphone. He didn't resist, not fully, but the way his hand lingered for a fraction of a second revealed something rare, uncertainty. She took the mic. The room fell completely silent. I felt my pulse in my throat as I watched her, unsure of what she was about to say. Unsure of where this was going, but unable to move. "I wasn't planning to say this," she began, her voice steady, carrying easily across the room. "I had something else prepared. Something simple. Something safe." A faint ripple of nervous laughter moved through the guests, but it faded quickly as she continued. "But I can't stand here today and pretend everything is perfect when it's not." The honesty in her words settled heavily in the air. I saw people exchange glances, confusion beginning to spread, but no one interrupted. No one dared to. She took a small breath, her eyes scanning the room slowly, as if she wanted everyone to feel what she was about to say. "I've listened to a lot of things tonight," she continued. "About loyalty. About family. About what it means to belong." Her gaze shifted. And then it found me. It didn't waver this time. It didn't pass over me like before. It stayed. "And I've realized something," she said, her voice softening just slightly, though it didn't lose its strength. "Real family doesn't tear you down in front of others. It doesn't humiliate you to prove a point. It doesn't make you feel small just because you chose a different path." A quiet tension spread through the room, more noticeable now. People weren't just listening anymore, they were understanding. Or at least, they were starting to. My chest tightened, each word landing deeper than I expected. She didn't choose the easy road. My sister went on, taking a step forward, closing the distance between us just slightly. She didn't stay where it was comfortable just to keep everyone else happy. I felt something shift inside me, something fragile and unfamiliar. She walked away from expectations that would have broken her, she said. She built something on her own, without support, without approval, without a safety net. I swallowed hard, my vision beginning to blur despite my efforts to stay composed. She stood on her own when no one stood with her. The room was completely still now. Even the air felt heavier. She didn't betray this family. My sister said, her voice rising just enough to carry conviction. This family failed her. The words hit like a shockwave. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down. Some glanced toward my father, whose expression had gone rigid, his usual confidence replaced by something tightly controlled. But for once, he didn't speak. For once, he didn't interrupt. My sister didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She showed me something I didn't understand before. She continued, her eyes still locked on mine. What it really means to be strong. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes now, impossible to ignore. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected anything like this. All I had prepared for was more silence, more avoidance, more of the same. But this was something else entirely. And today, she said, her voice soft but unwavering, on the most important day of my life, I don't want to celebrate love while ignoring truth. She took another step toward me. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because for the first time in years, I felt seen in a way I didn't know how to respond to. I want to say this clearly, she added, each word deliberate now, leaving no room for misunderstanding. The entire room seemed to lean into that moment. She turned fully toward me, closing whatever distance remained, until it felt like there was no one else there but us. I am proud of you. Everything stopped. The noise, the tension, the weight of the past, it all seemed to collapse into that single moment. Proud. The word echoed in my mind. Unfamiliar and overwhelming at the same time. I had imagined hearing it before, in quieter moments, in impossible scenarios where things had been different. But I had never truly expected it. Not like this. Not here. Not in front of everyone. A tear slipped down before I could stop it. Then another. I didn't try to hide them. Because for once I wasn't ashamed. For once I wasn't the one being reduced to something smaller. I was being lifted. And I didn't know how to carry that yet, but I felt it. Deep, undeniable, real. Across the room, I sensed movement, people shifting, reacting, absorbing what had just happened. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something unspoken. Something that had changed without anyone quite knowing how to name it. My father stood still, his expression unreadable, but the absence of his voice was louder than anything he could have said. And in that moment, I realized something quietly powerful. For the first time in my life, his silence didn't feel like control. It felt like the beginning of its loss. The words lingered in the air long after my sister spoke them, as if the entire room was holding on to them, unsure whether to breathe again or let the moment settle. Proud of you. They echoed inside me, louder than anything my father had ever said, louder than the doubt that had followed me for years. I stood there, frozen in place, trying to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't just relief. It wasn't just validation. It was something deeper. Something that reached into parts of me I had learned to keep guarded. For so long, I had imagined what it would be like to hear those words from my family. I had thought they would feel like closure, like a neat ending to years of tension and distance. But this wasn't neat. It wasn't simple. It was overwhelming. My sister was still standing in front of me, her expression softer now, but no less certain. The strength in her voice had settled into something warm, something steady. She wasn't just making a statement. She meant every word she had said. And that made it real in a way I couldn't ignore. The first sound that broke the silence was a single clap. It came from somewhere off to the side, hesitant at first, as if the person wasn't entirely sure it was the right response. Then another followed, and another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause. It wasn't polite or restrained. It grew quickly, gaining strength, people rising from their seats, as if they were responding to something more than just a speech. There was a shift in the energy now, something undeniable, something that had nothing to do with tradition or expectations. This wasn't about maintaining appearances anymore. This was about truth. I blinked, trying to process it. my chest tightening again but in a completely different way. The weight I had carried for so long felt like it was being lifted, piece by piece, replaced by something unfamiliar but powerful. Recognition. Not from everyone, not completely, but enough to matter. My sister stepped closer, her dress brushing softly against the floor with each movement. Up close, I could see the emotion in her eyes now, the way her composure had softened, revealing something more personal beneath it. "Come here," she said quietly. Her voice didn't need the microphone anymore. I hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Not because I didn't want to go to her, but because I wasn't used to this. I wasn't used to being welcomed so openly, so publicly, without conditions attached. But something inside me pushed past that hesitation. I took a step forward, then another. Each movement felt heavier than it should have, like I was crossing an invisible line that had existed for years. A line that separated who I had been from who I was becoming. When I reached her, she didn't wait. She pulled me into a hug. It was firm, grounding, and real in a way that made everything else fade into the background. For a moment, the room disappeared. The noise, the people, the tension, all of it. There was just this. Her arms around me, and the quiet understanding that we had both carried more than we ever said out loud. I closed my eyes, letting myself feel it fully. The warmth, the reassurance, the connection that had never completely broken, even when everything else had. "I'm sorry," she whispered so softly that only I could hear it. The words caught me off guard. "For what?" I murmured, my voice unsteady. "For not saying it sooner," she replied. I pulled back slightly, looking at her. There was no guilt in her expression, just honesty. "You didn't have to," I said. "Less I did," she insisted gently. I saw what was happening. I just didn't know how to stand against it back then. I held her gaze, understanding more than she probably realized. We had both been shaped by the same environment, the same expectations. The difference was, I had broken away, and she had stayed. Until now. "You're here now," I said quietly. She smiled, a small but genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." Around us, the applause slowly began to fade, but the energy remained. People were still standing, some watching with quiet emotion, others exchanging looks that spoke of shifting perspectives. I became aware of the room again, of the fact that this moment wasn't private, that everything that had just happened had been witnessed, absorbed, and would be remembered. And for the first time, that didn't terrify me. It didn't make me want to shrink or disappear. It made me stand a little straighter. I wiped at my cheeks, letting out a small breath that felt like it had been waiting years to escape. "You're going to ruin your makeup," I said lightly, trying to steady myself. She laughed softly. "Worth it." The simplicity of that response settled something in me. Across the room, I felt a shift in focus. I didn't need to look to know who it was. But I did anyway. My father stood near the front, exactly where he had been before, but something about him had changed. His posture was still straight, his expression controlled, but the certainty that had defined him earlier wasn't as solid. For once, he wasn't the center of the moment. For once, he wasn't directing the narrative. People weren't looking at him for guidance or approval. They were looking at us. And that alone was enough to disrupt everything he had built his authority on. Our eyes met briefly. I expected anger. I expected disapproval. But what I saw instead was harder to define. There was tension, yes. Something tightly held beneath the surface. But there was also something else. Something unfamiliar, something I had never seen directed at me before. Uncertainty. He didn't speak. He didn't step forward. He didn't try to reclaim control. And in that silence, something shifted inside me. For so long, his voice had been the loudest force in my life. It had shaped how I saw myself, how I measured my worth, how I navigated the world. But now, standing here, with my sister beside me, and a room full of witnesses who had just seen a different version of the story, his silence didn't feel like power anymore. It felt like absence, like a space where his authority used to be. I turned away from him, not out of defiance, but because, for the first time, I didn't need to hold his gaze to prove anything. I had already been seen. And more importantly, I had been acknowledged. My sister squeezed my hand gently. "Stay," she said. It wasn't a request filled with pressure. It was an invitation. I nodded. I will. And I meant it. Because leaving now would feel different. It wouldn't be escape. It wouldn't be avoidance. It would be a choice. And for once, I didn't want to choose distance. I wanted to stay in this moment. In this shift, in this unfamiliar but undeniable sense of belonging that had just begun to take shape. The music slowly returned, softer at first, as if the room itself was easing back into celebration. People began to sit, conversations starting again, but there was a difference now. A subtle but undeniable change in tone, in awareness. Things hadn't gone back to how they were before. They couldn't. And as I stood there, no longer hidden at the edges, no longer shrinking into the background, I realized something quietly but firmly. I wasn't the same person who had walked into this room. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something I needed to defend. It felt like something I could finally accept. I didn't remember deciding to move, but somehow my feet carried me forward, each step heavier than the last, as if I were walking through years of doubt that still clung to me. The applause didn't stop, it swelled, filled the hall, wrapped around me in a way I had never experienced before. For so long, I had been invisible in rooms like this, present but unnoticed, spoken about but never truly seen. And now every eye was on me, but it felt different. There was no judgment in those stares, no quiet comparisons, no unspoken pity. There was something warmer, something steady, something that felt dangerously close to respect. My sister stood just a few feet away, her expression open, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. This wasn't the carefully composed version of her that our parents had shaped and polished for the world. This was someone real. Someone who had finally stepped out from behind the expectations we had both been trapped in. When she stepped down from the stage and closed the distance between us, I felt my breath catch in my throat. For a second, I didn't know how to respond. We had spent so many years orbiting each other, close but never truly connected, bound by blood, but divided by everything that had been left unsaid. Then she wrapped her arms around me, and the contact broke something open inside my chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking in a way that made it impossible to doubt her sincerity. "For everything?" I stood there, frozen at first, my hands hovering uncertainly before slowly returning the embrace. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't something that erased the past or magically healed every wound. But it was real. And for the first time, that felt like enough. I pulled back slightly, searching her face, trying to understand how we had gotten here. How this moment, which would have once seemed impossible, was now unfolding in front of everyone. Her eyes held mine, and I saw something I had waited years to see. Not superiority, not distance, but recognition. She saw me. Not as the comparison, not as the other daughter, but as a person who had endured more than anyone had acknowledged. Around us, the applause slowly softened into murmurs, but the energy in the room had shifted. Conversations were no longer casual or dismissive, they carried weight now, a quiet awareness that something important had just happened. People who had once avoided my gaze now met it, some offering small nods, others faint smiles. It wasn't overwhelming or exaggerated. It was subtle, but it was there. And somehow that made it more meaningful. I glanced across the room, and my eyes found my father. He stood exactly where he had been before, but everything about him seemed smaller now. The confidence that had once filled his posture was gone, replaced by something uncertain, almost fragile. His grip on his glass had tightened, and for once, he had nothing to say. No cutting remark, no dismissive laugh, no way to twist the moment back into something that served him. For years, I had feared that man's opinion more than anything. I had shaped my choices around avoiding his disappointment, even when I pretended I didn't care. His voice had lived in my head long after his words were spoken, repeating itself in moments of doubt, reinforcing every insecurity I had tried to overcome. I had believed, on some level, that if I could just prove myself enough, if I could just succeed in the right way, he would finally see me differently. But standing there now, with the echo of my sister's words still lingering in the air, I realized something that felt both simple and profound. I didn't need him to see me differently. Because I finally saw myself clearly. The weight of that realization settled into me, steady and unshakable. It didn't come with fireworks or sudden, overwhelming emotion. It was quieter than that, but stronger. It was the kind of clarity that didn't demand attention, because it didn't need validation to exist. I had spent years building a life without their support, learning how to rely on myself when there was no one else to turn to. Every late night, every setback, every small victory I had celebrated alone. It had all shaped me into someone far stronger than the version of me they had tried to define. And yet, I had still carried their labels, still allowed their voices to linger in the back of my mind. Until now. Now, those voices felt distant, like echoes from a place I no longer belonged to. My sister squeezed my hand gently, drawing my attention back to her. There was a softness in her expression, but also a quiet determination, as if she understood that this moment wasn't just about what she had said, it was about what came next. "We'll figure things out," she said quietly, just for me. "If you want to." I studied her for a moment, searching for any trace of the old dynamic, the unspoken hierarchy that had always existed between us. But it wasn't there. Whatever had shifted inside her had changed the way she stood, the way she spoke, the way she looked at me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we could build something new. Not the relationship we had been forced into, shaped by comparison and expectation, but something real, something chosen. "I'd like that," I replied softly. The words felt unfamiliar on my tongue, but not unwelcome. As the evening slowly resumed around us, the music picking up again and conversations returning, I noticed something else that felt just as important as everything that had already happened. I felt calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from avoiding conflict or shrinking yourself to keep the peace, but the kind that comes from standing fully in who you are and realizing that it's enough. More than enough. I wasn't waiting for the next insult. I wasn't bracing myself for another moment of humiliation. I wasn't scanning the room for signs of judgment. For the first time in my life, I was simply there, present, unapologetic. Whole. The girl who had once stood in the background swallowing her voice had not disappeared. She had grown. She had endured. She had learned. And somewhere along the way, without anyone noticing, she had become someone unbreakable. Not because the world had been kind to her, but because it hadn't been, and she had survived anyway. I took a slow breath, letting it fill my lungs completely, grounding myself in the reality of the moment. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't temporary. This was a turning point. And as I stood there, no longer defined by the roles I had been forced into, no longer carrying the weight of expectations that were never mine to begin with, I understood something with absolute certainty. I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. I never had. The only thing I had ever needed was to believe it myself. And now, finally, I did.